There are just 79 days, folks, until Election Day. And this week's Democratic Convention in Chicago is a golden opportunity for Democrats to elevate Vice President Kamala Harris as the party's standard bearer. And new this morning, we are learning how each night of the convention will highlight her vision for the country. Tomorrow's opening night's theme, For the People. Tuesday will outline Democrats' bold vision for America's future. Wednesday, they're calling a fight for our freedoms. And Thursday, when Harris takes the stage, a message for our future. Meanwhile, the Harris-Walz campaign is getting ready to unleash their war chest. The campaign says it will spend at least $370 million on television and digital ads between Labor Day and the election. Joining us now from Chicago is Harris-Walz Principal Deputy Campaign Manager Quentin Fulks. Quentin, thank you for getting up early, okay, because Chicago is an hour behind D.C., so we appreciate you.
We definitely do, Quentin. No, man, I know what that's like with the convention looming right in front of you in 24 hours. And the announcement this morning of the themes. Talk to us about these themes because you know, they seem to go to a space that, to be honest, the country hasn't been in a long while. Talking about its future, there's been a lot of backward thinking and looking, particularly from the Republican side of things. How did these themes come together, and what do they say about what the vice president wants America to know about her and her vision for America?
Well, good morning. Thank you all for having me. Look, I think that these themes perfectly encapsulate the vice president's vision for the country. For the people is going to talk about who we're fighting for. The vice president says this all the time. It's very important that the people understand that they are at the center of all of this. The reason that she pushes these policies to lower costs are because of the people. We have to also talk about the future in a different way of doing things with common sense approaches, with stability. And that's what Vice President Harris is going to bring to the ticket and continue to make sure that we protect and fight for our freedoms, which is a stark contrast between Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and their Extreme Project 2025 agenda. And I think throughout the convention, you're going to hear stories that talk about the vice president's record of fighting and delivering for the American people as a prosecutor, attorney general, a senator, and the vice president. And I think that those things perfectly encapsulate that.
And Quentin, some of that work will happen at the convention, some of it, of course, happening with paid media. I want to take a listen to one of the radio spots that the campaign has out, largely biographical about the vice president.
Standing up for everyday Americans is at the very foundation of who Kamala Harris is. Raised in a middle-class home by a working mother who instilled in her a passion for justice and equality. That's why when Kamala Harris became district attorney, she stood up for our kids, keeping them safe by prosecuting sex offenders. She also pioneered a program to give nonviolent drug offenders a second chance. As president, Kamala Harris will continue the fight for everyday Americans.
You talk to any of the pollsters, you talk to people who are doing focus groups, the big thing you hear, you know this, is I like her, I want to hear more, right? They still have gaps in their understanding of who Vice President Harris is. How much of that is biographical? How much of that is filling in the policy gaps about what a Harris administration would actually look like?
It is both. But as I mentioned in my first answer, I think that it's very important that people understand why the vice president is pushing for these policies. She grew up with a working mother who rented most of their lives. And so when she talks about things like making housing and renting more affordable, it's because she lives that. And so, yes, the policy proposals and the specifics on that are as important because at the end of the day, this is about how she is going to change the lives for everyday Americans. But as we are introducing her, it is incredibly important that we make sure that people understand where those values come from and why those values are ingested. And so our campaign has aggressively started spending to make sure that we are defining the vice president early because we have a short amount of time. Right. We have to introduce her to a lot of America, and ads like the ones you just played are exactly how we're going to do that.
Quentin, one aspect of this that I've been fascinated by is the reaction of the press, the media. The hard press by many to get the vice president to sit down with them as if to say, this isn't legitimate until you talk to us.
Also, as if Joe Biden wasn't the nominee like a month ago.
Exactly. So, the expectations of turning that corner, to me, has been really amusing to watch and hear many in the media sort of go after the vice president because she hasn't done that face to face. But what my response has been is, she seems to be talking directly to the people. In other words, I don't need to sit down with the media and the press to do a one-on-one if I have the opportunity to have this larger conversation in which I can more directly define myself. Was that a legitimate, not legitimate, the wrong word, was that an intentional effort to sort of push past the noise of Washington press corps and all of that drama to have this more direct conversation? Because it seems to be thematically where you're going, a more direct approach and conversation with the American people.
Well, look, we entered this convention with a lot of enthusiasm and momentum. And that enthusiasm and momentum is because Vice President Harris and Governor Walz have been out on the ground talking to and communicating directly with voters. And, Michael, you said it basically, but I'll say it a different way. The Vice President has been interviewing. She's been interviewing with the American people. And she respects the free media, respects the press, and so that will come on her time. But right now, our focus is making sure that we're communicating with the voters, that they see her, that they understand her worldview, her perspective, her upbringing, her record of delivering and fighting for American families to protect their freedoms, and her vision for moving forward. And so Vice President Harris is going to continue to do that. They're kicking off a bus tour today, going throughout Pennsylvania. They're going to be in a rally in Wisconsin tomorrow before they head into the convention. And so we're incredibly excited to continue to stay out on the road in the battleground states, talking to the voters who are ultimately going to decide this election and making sure that they understand that this race is fundamentally a choice between two stark visions for the future of this country, one where we're lowering costs, protecting freedoms, and continuing to deliver for the American people, and one that is a extreme, unstable Project 2025 agenda that is led by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
You know, Quentin, it strikes me, you know, I don't know much, okay, but it strikes me that at this point in the cycle, given the switch, Vice President Harris now at the top of the ticket, when she sits down for an interview, she would have needed to have some policies, because I would assume that our colleagues in the press and us as well, we would like to ask her about those policies. And we have now seen some of those policies begin to roll out. The vice president rolled out a part of her economic policy earlier this week of her campaign and what she would do if elected president. There has been some criticism of the policy because people are assuming, and some Republicans, some economists, even some, you know, moderate Democrats are assuming that what the policy is when it comes to price gouging is really about price caps. But I read it as it is if you are price gouging, then we will hold you accountable. Can you just speak to these two pieces of that? Because I do think the prices and what's happening at the grocery store and the inflation, these record profits that these companies are making, yet the pandemic, and people are recovering from the pandemic, the companies are definitely recovering, yet the prices are not going down, is in fact an issue that the American people absolutely care about.
I'm glad you asked the question, Simone. Look, these are capitalist, market-based solutions that the vice president is putting forward. The vice president believes that businesses should be able to make money. But what the vice president does not believe is that these businesses should be able to make money simply because. When prices go up simply because of the law of supply and demand, that is completely fine. Those are the laws of economics. But when prices are just jacked up just so that corporations and big businesses can increase quarterly profits or yearly profits on the back of middle-class families and small businesses, that is where the vice president is going to step in, and that is what she has demonstrated that she has been willing to do. This isn't something that is partisan. You see state attorney generals in places like Texas and Louisiana filing cases against companies that do this, jacking up gas prices during Hurricane Harvey, going after beef competitors. One of the biggest, it's the fact that they are raising prices simply because there is no competition. There's nowhere else to get beef. Pharmacy benefit managers are doing it. And so what you see Vice President Harris saying is that she is not going to let corporations just raise prices simply because. If prices go up because of the law of supply and demand, then we will deal with that. But companies just raising prices simply because they can do it is not something that Vice President Harris is going to stand for. And I think she's laid out a very clear agenda proposal to do it. And so the demagoguing that's coming from Republicans know that this isn't about fixed prices. In fact, I think that there is reason to believe that Vice President Harris is going to work across the aisle in a bipartisan fashion to make sure, and this is something that we know polls extremely well, something that the voters have been asking for, and this is a common sense solution to deliver that. And so Donald Trump and Republicans Republicans should stop playing games and come to the table and work with Vice President Harris to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the people, not just trying to win a political campaign.
Quinton, real quick, you talked about the bus tour through Pennsylvania. As you guys know, 2020, President Biden, Vice President Harris, they won the state by just over 1%. And that was in part by driving up margins in solidly blue counties. You're doing some of that, but you're also going into Beaver County and trying to chip away there at Donald Trump's would-be lead. What is the message to folks in a county like Beaver?
That this campaign is inclusive, that Vice President Harris and Governor Walz's administration will be inclusive, and that they're fighting for all Americans, regardless of if your county votes red or if your county votes blue. You all know that this is my whole ethos. I bring this from me coming from a rural county myself, a small town in Georgia. It's the strategy that I implemented for Senator Warnock, and I think that it is something that we have to do. In order for Democrats to win places, they have to go there. We have to show up. We have to talk to people, and we have a vision for this country that includes people that live in these rural communities, in these small towns, and we have to go and communicate that. When we don't, we just cede the argument to the Republicans and their extreme agenda, and that is what these voters believe. And so we're going directly at that, and we're going to continue to talk to these voters and voters all across the country, no matter where you live, red states, blue states, rural counties, urban counties or not, suburbs as well, because that's how you run a campaign, and that's the work that the Vice President and Governor Walz are going to continue to do.
And to add to the urgency, it might be 7 to 9 days until Election Day, but it is only 29 days until early voting begins in the state of Pennsylvania. Quinton Fulks, as always, thank you for getting up early and being with us.
A new Washington Post poll, ABC poll out this morning, shows Donald Trump is losing support with women voters to Vice President Harris. Trump trails Harris with women ages 18 to 29 by 23% and with women ages 30 to 49 by 17%. Back in July, the same poll showed Trump actually had an advantage over President Biden with the same groups. New York Governor Kathy Hochul joins us now.
Governor Hochul, good morning. Can we just start with earlier this week, J.D. Vance out on the campaign trail, was doing a bunch of interviews and said that women, he doesn't think really care about abortion. They care about the issues, and he doesn't think abortion is one of the issues that is important to them. He said they care about normal things. I'm wondering your take on that.
Oh, my gosh. If you want more evidence of how out of touch he is with what women are thinking about, talking about, and are concerned about, then that's Exhibit A. I have to tell you that because of Donald Trump, 1 out of 3 women in America now live under an abortion ban. So women have seen what happened before under Donald Trump. They don't want to have the Trump travesty part 2. They know what's coming, and that's a national abortion ban. They'll stop at nothing. So I would say he is going to continue on that path to their detriment, and that's one more reason why Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will defeat them handily, especially when it comes to picking up the women's vote. And
if, to your point, Governor, it's borne out in the numbers. Take a look at this poll. This was conducted May 15th to June 18th. So this is a while ago, but it was published on August 14th of women of reproductive age. This was their broad opposition to abortion restrictions. 74% think abortion should be legal. 74% oppose leaving it up to the states, which, as you know, is the big argument they're going to make. And 70% support nationwide right to abortion. 64% oppose 15-week national abortion. I mean, Governor, they are seeing the same numbers, right? They are simply choosing not to care. I simply do not understand the strategy.
I don't think there is a strategy. This is who they are. They can't go recreate themselves. They realize that their views of women are back to 1848, even before the first women's convention demanding rights that was held here in the state of New York. So they can continue on that path. They are so detached from reality when it comes to what American women want. American women, I mean Republicans, independents, Democrats. So that's fine. Continue. I would recommend them that they continue on the path of saying women don't care about abortion, and we're just going to run up the score.
Governor, the campaign announced this morning its themes for this upcoming convention week. And They lay out thematically for the people on Monday a bold vision for America's future, a fight for our freedoms, and ending with Kamala Harris accepting the nomination under the theme for our future. This issue on abortion, like so many other issues, are a thread throughout these themes. What is do you think the campaign's impact going to be? Sort of taking thematically this idea of, for the people, our future, the fight for our rights. How do you think that will resonate in this thematic approach with an issue like abortion, among others?
I don't think it's just abortion they're going to be talking about. Abortion actually is an issue that it comes down to whether or not you're allowing people to have their own rights. So that transcends just the narrow issue of abortion. We're talking about voting rights and right to make your decisions and the right to live in good housing, the right to have a good education, the right to be able to afford to buy the groceries and have the child care for your family. So there's also affordability is going to be a major theme of this. And I went yesterday shopping in a Target with a mom that we in New York were able to help with money to help buy those back to school supplies. I saw her struggling and having to compare prices, and her little 12-year-olds saying, you can't get that one, Mommy, that one's too much. So she'll be talking about families in a broader sense. Abortion's very important, but I would not say this convention is all about that at all. When we talk about for the people, that means struggling working class Americans who are looking for someone who has their back, who's lived their experience more than a Donald Trump ever can lay claim to.
Governor, as you said that, it made me think about the economic policy proposal that Vice President Harris put forward, a piece of her proposal that she put forward this week. And dovetailing with something, frankly, that you're doing in New York. New York is sending out $300 direct payments, and Newsweek has a story on it. Susan Blake wrote, and who qualified. The money is now available to low and moderate income families. No application is necessary. Is this universal basic income? Is this a pilot program that's happening in New York? What is the backstory on this particular proposal?
This is a continuation of my policies that begun this summer to realize that families are still struggling with inflation. We have a lot we can do. So a couple of things, $350 million that we have allocated for families to help with back to school spending. So this is a one-shot infusion right now. And I can't tell you how grateful this mom was yesterday when we shopped. She said, I could not buy what I need for my two sons. One is autistic. They need extra help. They're just a wonderful family. And she said countless times we walked through the aisles of Target, I thank you for letting this happen. This would be such a struggle for us. So it's a recognition that we are hearing these voices. We also help families with child care. I announced a plan where a family of four with $108,000 of income or less, their child care costs are no longer $350 on average. It'll be capped at $15. See, this is what I want to get out there, is how Democrats are embracing the families. We own family values. We own that narrative because we're the ones actually putting money in the pockets of struggling families here in New York and across the country under Kamala Harris's plan. And it makes a real difference. That money goes back in the economy. It helps create jobs. It's a smart investment, investing in our families.
To that point, let's take a listen to Vice President Harris on the stump talking about how she'll restore the child tax credit.
So as president, I'll not only restore that tax cut, but expand it. We will provide $6,000 in tax relief to families during the first year of a child's life.
Governor, we know this works. We know it lifted children out of poverty. You really shouldn't even have to make the argument to Republicans that this is, in fact, a good thing. And yet here we are. We started talking about women, so I want to finish by talking about men, knowing that that is some of the work that the Harris-Walz campaign will need to do to close the gap in this election. How do you make something like the child tax credit a message that appeals to and resonates with American men?
Oh, I think this is easy to do. We're talking about American families. There are many men in households with children, many, and they're the ones who also have to pay the bills. They're sitting at the kitchen table at night just like a woman would be with her children. So I wouldn't even separate men and women. This is a family issue, and that money back in their pockets, like we did here in New York. When I first became governor, the child tax credit started at age 4. I said, wait a minute. I have a 2-year-old grandchild. The diapers, the formula, everything when they're infants costs so much more money. So why aren't we helping families from birth on up? And that's exactly what Kamala Harris is talking about. I think the men will appreciate getting that financial assistance. It's going to help all families just be able to survive and get by, but also we want to give them a better future. This is what the Harris-Walz administration is going to do. I'm so excited about it.
Governor Kathy Hochul, are you speaking this week, actually, before we let you go?
Monday night, I have a rehearsal as soon as I'm done with you.
All right, Governor Kathy Hochul, we will be watching you Monday night. Thank you so much for your time.
Joining me now, our good friend Adrian Elrod, senior advisor and senior spokesperson for the Harris-Walz campaign. So, wow, you're right where you're supposed to be, where all the action is, for sure. But here's the thing. You're on the campaign now, but you were in the Biden White House. What's your reaction to Donald Trump and things he's saying about the economic policy being rolled out by Kamala Harris?
Well, a couple of things, Alex. Yes, first of all, it's great to be with you from Chicago today. There's so much excitement here. We are one day ahead of the convention starting, and you can really feel the excitement and enthusiasm among Democrats all throughout Chicago and here, of course, at the United Center. But look, you know, Vice President Harris, she laid out her economic plan Friday, in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she talked about her vision for America. She talked about the fact that she grew up middle class. You know, we'd have an ad on TV right now talking about her middle class upbringing, the fact that she worked at McDonald's, that she truly understands what middle class families are facing. And so she looks at that through the lens of how she's going to make her economic decisions and what her economic policies will be. So she laid out her own vision in Raleigh, North Carolina. She talked about the fact that she wants to make sure that she's taking on corporations, that she's, diffusing price gouging, that she's focusing on lowering costs for families. And by the way, Alex, as you know, she was very much part of 4 major economic bills getting passed under President Biden's leadership. Obviously, the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill. There's a number of things, the Chips and Science Act that I worked on at the Department of Commerce in terms of implementing. She got a lot done with President Biden, but she also wants to make sure that she's laying out her own economic vision. Donald Trump can say everything he wants to say, but the bottom line is there have been a number of nonpartisan economists who have said that Project 2025, which Donald Trump has his fingerprints all over, would actually create a recession. It would raise inflation. It would raise costs for families. So she really is making a contrast here on her own economic vision, but also wants to make it clear that she will be putting middle-class families, the American people, in front of any decision when it comes to how she's going to focus on the economy.
So, as you're well aware, the vice president and Governor Walz, they're on that bus tour in Pennsylvania right now. Donald Trump spoke there yesterday, and Associated Press says that the vice president's reversal on policy issues like fracking that are important to people in Pennsylvania opens the door to attacks by Republicans. How will the campaign handle these kinds of challenges?
Look, I mean, Alex, we know that Donald Trump, he's not right on the issues. He's not fighting for American families. He's fighting for himself. He's running for president in part because he wants to keep himself out of jail. He's a convicted felon. That is different than when he first ran for president. That is something that has changed since he ran for president, last time on the ticket in 2020. But he's trying to distract because he's not right on the issues. And the vice president is making it clear to voters where she stands, that she is fighting for American families, that she is putting the desires and the needs of American families first. That is what she thinks about every single day when she wakes up. How am I going to improve the lives of the American people? Donald Trump wakes up and thinks about himself. So she's continuing to make that contrast every single day on the campaign trail. We've seen Donald Trump look more and more unhinged. He's made some crazy, erratic statements, more erratic than usual, which is saying a lot about Donald Trump on the campaign trail because he's worried about the vice president. He sees her rising the polls. You know, he sees the fact that she's bringing independents, young voters, voters of all types into her fold. And he understands that that the American people are aligning with her vision, that they're aligning with her message. And it's obviously scaring him and it's making him nervous. And so he has to resort to saying erratic things and making statements that are, frankly, not true and not aligned with our campaign.
Yeah, I think you can throw the word ludicrous in to describe some of those statements that he made.
You could say that.
Yeah,
yep.
Let me ask you about a pretty fascinating New York Times profile today, and it highlights the roles VP Harris played in key White House decisions. But I want to read two short parts from it. Here's the first quote. She saw trapdoors around her and wanted to avoid them. She considered herself a team player, but could not always be sure the team had her best interests at heart. Here's the other one. Her allies believed the president's staff often clipped her wings, appropriating her initiatives for him to announce without building up her own public profile. So look, you were part of the White House communications team. Is that an accurate assessment?
Well, look, I mean, Alex, I'm not going to sit here and comment about a New York Times story that has a lot of sources on background or on deep background, not going on the record. What I will say is that I was part of the CHIPS implementation team at the Department of Commerce. I was part of the Biden-Harris campaign in 2020, and I saw President Biden, Vice President Harris together on a number of occasions, working together, collaborating together. President Biden has made it clear constantly that he looked to Vice President Harris as his top partner, that he sought her counsel and advice on a number of key issues. That was something I certainly saw when they were running together to seek the presidency in 2020. It is something that I observed over the past few years as part of the administration, and it is something that I still see today. When President Biden made it clear he was going to step down, he was going to put his full weight behind Vice President Harris as the Democratic nominee. He said in part, one of the reasons why he was doing that is because he thinks that she is the most prepared Democrat to take on Donald Trump and make sure that we save democracy and keep the policies of his administration going. She's been a true partner to him. That's what I've always seen. And I don't really want to, talk about conjecture and, sources that frankly, won't go on the record, which tells me they don't really know what they're talking about.
Okay, I get it. And let me just say, because we're out of time, you're lucky I'm not going to ask you to reveal any surprises. I tried to get that out of Mike Memley earlier, and he's like, no, then it wouldn't be a surprise. I'm like, I'm going to try and get it out of Adrian. But you're off the hook, my friend. This time.
Well, I will tell you this, Alex. I will tell you that Stephanie Cutter and Ricky Kirshner, two of the best in the business, who brought you the 2020 convention virtually, who brought you the inauguration. They are doing this convention here. This convention here today. I can tell you it's going to be a really incredible 4 days. So buckle up and make sure you're watching your TV every single night. It's going to be really, really quite something.
Okay, duly noted. We'll be there. Appreciate you. Thanks so much, Adrian.
Joining me now from the DNC Convention Center in Chicago, Mitch Landrieu, National Co-Chair of the Harris-Walz 2024 campaign. Mr. Landrieu, thank you for your time tonight. Obviously, the mood among Democrats going into this convention is much different than just barely a month ago when President Biden stepped aside and the party coalesced around Kamala Harris. And we've got new data from ABC and the Washington Post showing just how much ground Harris has gained. She's ahead of Trump nationally at 49% to 45% among registered voters. We'll note that's within the margin of error, but a vast improvement from where we were just a month ago. How do you build on the momentum this week?
Well, Reverend, thank you. It's great to see you. And, of course, it's great to be here in Chicago. A lot has changed in the last 30 days. But the one thing that hasn't changed is Donald Trump is still a convicted felon. Donald Trump has been determined to be a sexual abuser, a business fraud. Donald Trump was a terrible president who left the economy of this country in a shambles. And Donald Trump is about darkness and grievance. That has not changed. And he hasn't said one thing or done anything to change the way people in America feel about him. But what's changed on our side is that this side of the ticket is fired up and ready to go. As you can tell, there's a huge amount of excitement, hope, and optimism. And, by the way, thanks to President Biden for the incredible decision that he made, one of the most selfless decisions I know that you've witnessed in your incredible life, to basically put us in a position where Kamala Harris and Tim Walz can bring us into the future that has been dying to be born for quite a long time. So a lot of excitement, a lot of joy. And, of course, you see people around the country responding to that. Look at the folks that are showing up in the places where they're going. It's really just an incredible thing. I've never seen it in my political lifetime, and it's something for us to savor and enjoy. However, The vice president will tell us all the time, keep your head down, keep your shoulder to the wheel. This is going to be a very, very, very close race. Everybody's got to get out and vote. And if we do that, we're going to have a brighter tomorrow for all of us.
Now, the Harris-Walz ticket kicked off its bus tour of swing state of Pennsylvania this morning en route to Chicago and the convention. I want to play another moment from the campaign stop earlier today in Rochester, Pennsylvania. Take a listen.
This campaign is about a recognition that, frankly, over the last several years, there's been this kind of perversion that has taken place, I think, which is to suggest that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down, when what we know is the real and true measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up. That's what we see as strength. We know what strength looks like. That's what strength looks like.
Mr. Landrieu, what can you tell us about the vice president's message Thursday night at the convention as she accepts the Democratic nomination?
Well, first of all, amen to what she just said. Secondly, remember, this is she and Tim Walz's second time around the block. They've been to all the swing states already, and they're starting the second time. Donald Trump's been kind of hanging out in front of his place at Bedminster talking about Cheerios and whatever else he was talking about. But in that very small clip, you saw a very clear difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's vision for America. Donald Trump's vision is to tear people apart. He has pitted father against son, mother against daughter. He really doesn't have an economic agenda. All he wants to do is give tax cuts to the rich and tear everybody down because he thinks that's how you win, and he thinks that's how you bring America back. Kamala Harris, though, her vision, and Tim Walz is, listen, when we are together, when we include everybody, when we lift everybody up, not push everybody down, that's when America is at her greatest. And that is what she's going to lean into on Thursday night. She'll put a little bit more meat on that bones, but essentially what you really just need to know about it, she believes in America where everybody has a seat at the table, and Donald Trump believes in an America where only he's sitting at the table.
Former President Trump held his own rally in Pennsylvania last night where he went on a tirade of attacks against Vice President Harris, calling her both a communist and a fascist, and going on an extended rant about her laugh. Trump has also apparently changed his mind about campaigning during the Democratic convention, announcing a series of events this week, supposedly on the economy, crime, and national security. What do you make of the message Trump has been sending Americans at this point in the race?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, when he's talking, he's generally lying. And in the last couple of weeks, people are wondering whether he's cray-cray, because we've been thinking about this for a long time. He doesn't know whether he's coming or gone. He's like a lost ball in high weeds. So you can't hardly understand anything that he's saying again. But that's who Donald Trump is. If you want chaos, if you want somebody that is constantly tearing somebody down, and let me just say this, if I might just lean into this. He seems to have a real problem with the fact that he's running against a woman who is black, and he can't understand that whether she's Indian or she's black, and he's concerned about it. So let me try to explain it to him, although I can't understand it for him. You can actually in America be two things at once. You can be Indian and you can be black. You can be Irish and you can be Italian, or you can be ignorant and arrogant like he is. Because in America, we believe in everybody coming together and doing one thing and lifting everybody up. And so he doesn't have an economic plan. All he has is a plan for himself and his friends. She's got a plan for the future, and I think the energy that you're seeing out there right now is a wellspring of support across the political spectrum, by the way, across geographies where people are finally saying, you know what, I can see a brighter future. I like the fact that we can be strong and kind at the same time, because that's what America is really about, and she is the epitome of it.
Let's switch to the vice president's emerging economic plan. You served Louisiana for several years as it dealt with natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina. Your background was one of the reasons President Biden tapped you to help implement his signature infrastructure law. Having seen how policy plays out in the real world for decades now, how will the Harris economic plan, centering middle-class tax relief, housing, and lowered costs, positively impact real people, and can it appeal to Republicans and independents?
Well, 100%, because she is going to be focused on building up the middle class. That's where her focus has always been that's where it's going to be. Donald Trump's is on tax cuts for the rich, and then grievance, hers is for dealing with all of the things that people suffer with every day. And Tim Walz and her have been out there talking about a little girl from Oakland, a little boy from Nebraska, coming together to make sure that we lift up everybody who needs help. And whether it's going after big corporations that are price gouging or these new housing co-ops that are causing people to pay more rent than they're supposed to, making sure that groceries are lowering their costs, and just giving people a chance. Just giving people a chance. People who have talent, give them the opportunity to perform, and then America's going to be fine. And she's going to help make that happen. But we got to keep our shoulder to the wheel. Tough race coming. We got to work hard every day because it's going to be a goal line decision. We got to make it happen.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Landrieu, national co-chair of the Harris campaign. I'll probably see you sometime this week, I'm sure.
We have spent a lot of time on the show warning you about the dangers of Project 2025. We've also spent some time talking about one of the plan's key authors, that guy, Russ Vought, someone who could be White House Chief of Staff during a second Trump term. Well, this week, we watched Russ Vought explain to undercover reporters that he is personally overseeing the drafting of hundreds of executive orders, regulations, and memos to help make Project 2025's radical goals a reality. And while Trump and his allies claim they know nothing about Project 2025, Vought managed to undermine that claim at literally every turn.
I don't know what the hell it is. It's Project 25. He's involved in Project. And then they read some of the things, and they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme.
He's running against the brand. He is not running against any people. Okay. He is not running against any institutions. It's interesting. He's, in fact, not even opposing himself to a particular policy.
Project 2025 is not affiliated with the Trump campaign.
I am very happy with the JD pick. I think it's transformative for sure. And he's, think of him as a member version of what we do.
Project 2025 has absolutely nothing to do with the past, present, or future. President Trump and President Trump alone will make his own policies.
If it's someone like Stephen Miller or Bob Lighthizer, then all this stuff gets plugged right in.
Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman of New York. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to just start by asking you to give us your reaction to that undercover video, that's what that was, of Russ Vought, and that side-by-side of Trump allies trying to distance themselves from Project 2025.
Yeah, it's so telling, right? In private, it's clear that this is all part of the Trump operation. You don't have to look far. Russ Vought was the Office of Management and Budget Director under Donald Trump. John McEntee is another head leader of Project 2025. He was Donald Trump's personnel manager. Dan Lanz just left, even though he was a big part of Trump's operation. And let's not forget, Jen, this is called Project 2025. It is not called Project 2029. It is not called Project of the Future. Donald Trump has been the clear presumptive nominee since January 7th, 2021. And we all know that this is exactly what they are gearing up for. They have a massive Rolodex of people that they want to plug into the Trump administration. There has been a tremendous coordination behind the scenes. Donald Trump realizes that it is a political liability, so he will lie as he always does and try to run away from it. But he can run as far as he wants, and Project 2025 is going to follow him.
No question. And that guy, Russ Vought, everybody saw is rumored to be on his short list for chief of staff. So, the American people know what's going on here. Let me ask you, Kamala Harris, there's a lot to talk about Project 2025. We will continue to do it. You will continue to do it. But Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are about to embark on this bus tour through Pennsylvania. They're kicking it off today. There's so much energy around this campaign. I mean, it felt for so long like a big part of the Democratic message was anti-Project 2025, anti-Donald Trump. Obviously, that's still core. But does it feel to you like this election is becoming more about voting for something rather than just voting against something?
Yes, and that's partly, I think, the energy and vision that Kamala Harris has brought. And Joe Biden has been a historically impressive president. But the message he had was, you know, we need to finish this job, and the danger is Donald Trump if not. Now we really have a messenger in Kamala Harris who can promote this vision of the future where we are working in government for the American people. We are trying to lower costs. We are trying to give people the opportunity to achieve the American dream, as opposed to Donald Trump and Project 2025, which wants to go back to the 1950s and take away our rights and freedoms and limit immigration and limit the great melting pot that is this country. And it's basically a forward-looking vision versus a regressive vision that Donald Trump has.
Some of it's even going back to the 1890s, even before the 1950s, believe it or not. So before I let you go, I have to ask you, I mean, House Republicans led by your colleague, Congressman James Comer, I know one of your favorites, launched an investigation this week into Governor Tim Walz's connections to China. What do you make of this latest attempt to attack the Harris-Walz ticket? And I mean, I don't think it's going to stick, but what do you make of all of it?
Well, it'll probably stick as well as the Biden impeachment investigation did, which is to say not at all. But it is grossly inappropriate and improper. You cannot use the official authority of Congress as the Oversight Committee to do partisan electoral work. And we made that clear that that's all the Biden impeachment investigation was for a year and a half. But now there's no way around it. As soon as Vice President Harris and Tim Walz are on the ticket now, James Comer launches investigations into them. It is clear that James Comer is improperly using the Oversight Committee as an arm of Donald Trump's campaign. It won't stick because there's nothing there and because Comer is inept, but it is truly, truly remarkable that they would go this far and this brazenly to make such a partisan effort out of an official duty of Congress.
And Governor Walz was teaching when he was in China. I think people should be aware of what he was even doing there. Congressman Dan Goldman, I always enjoy talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks, Jen. See you this week.
Over the past week, both Vice President Harris and Donald Trump have embraced expansions of government power to drive their economic policies. But they're doing so in what I will call vastly different areas with vastly different levels of detail.
I will be laser focused on creating opportunities for the middle class.
So they say it's the most important subject. I'm not sure it is.
As president, I'll attack and take on the issue of the cost of health care.
If it's a communist system, you're going to be thrown into a system where everybody gets health care.
As president, I will take on the high costs that matter most to most Americans, like the cost of food.
Wow, school lunch is up 65%. How can a family afford that? But look at this over here. What a nice job. I think I'm going to take some of them back to my cottage.
Joining us now, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. She is a member of the Committee on Finance and the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Senator, good to see you.
Good morning, Senator. It's great to have you back at the table. So let's deal with a little bit of the crazy that we see coming out of the Republican side on the economic messaging here. I mean, okay, so we get the whole photo prop thing with packages of food that Donald Trump would have no idea what they cost simply because he don't shop for food. So there is that part of it. But what I found interesting relative to Alicia's setup with the contrast was the sort of dismissive nature of the economic piece not being important. Talk, if you will, about why this is a specific area for the vice president to lean into this economic message. And I want to call your attention to a tweet that you had posted on Thursday. Back in 2020, Kamala Harris and I teamed up on a Senate bill to crack down on price gougers in the pandemic. She has always fought to protect families. That aspect of that economic message is a very potent one right now. Why is that, and why this particular narrative around prices.
So understand this. Families across this country struggle with prices, and Kamala Harris fights for those families. So start with price gouging. Right now, what has happened with some of these giant corporations that have market dominance have used the excuse of inflation as a way to raise their prices, not just to pass along an increase in cost, but actually to boost their profits enormously. So, biggest egg producer in the United States increased their profit margin by 718% by raising the price of eggs beyond anything anybody expected. Same kind of thing in, think of Kraft, the company that makes macaroni and cheese, you know, those little boxes of macaroni and cheese, and Oscar Mayer wieners. Increased their profits by 448%. That's not just passing along increased in cost, that's price gouging. Now, Donald Trump just poo-poos and says, doesn't know, doesn't care, let giant corporations charge you whatever they want to charge you. Vice President Harris says, no, we need some curbs, we need some rules. Back when she was Attorney General in California, she went after the price gougers following big wildfires in California. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, she said, we got to put some rules in place around price gouging. So now she's saying, as presidential candidate, this is one of the things that she can do to bring down costs for families. Right there in your grocery cart, she can bring those costs down. And she wants to do it with a price gouging bill. Something, by the way, I should point out, both red states and blue states have the power to do. Nearly 40 states already have price gouging rules, laws. They've been used in Florida, in Texas after big hurricanes. Vice President Harris says, as president, I want to see that go nationwide, where we can go after these big national companies. And I want to give every attorney general in every state the power to bring these actions, along with the FTC, the federal government, to be able to act on behalf of American families. She will lower costs for your family. That's what she's fighting for.
Senator, there's almost no one as good as explaining these economic concepts as you. The only person I think who comes close, perhaps, is Rohit Chopra, who you're very familiar with, runs the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He is. I want you to take a listen. He was on with us yesterday to how he explained it, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
I think we have to be clear with each other. I don't care if it's a hurricane or a pandemic. That should not be an excuse to jack up prices. But that's really what we have seen since 2020, 2021. We even have grocery CEOs, one CEO of Kroger, saying they make more money, more profit when there's some inflation. They can use it as an excuse to hike up prices, and often they want to consolidate more and more power to do that.
Let's talk about inflation as an excuse, because that is a big word that we keep hearing from voters, that inflation remains too high. It remains a top concern. I think part of what the campaign is trying to do here is say, it may be inflation that you're concerned with, but if what you are concerned with is high prices, then you need to look at it more holistically. And Vice President Harris has said herself, in order for her proposals to work, is going to have to go through Congress. Can you just help us understand specifically what your bill would do to help control prices?
Sure. So let's remember, we started down this path back during the pandemic at a time when there were supply chain kinks, when the war in Ukraine started, so that certain commodities couldn't be purchased in the United States, when COVID meant that deliveries weren't being made. And so prices begin to go up. And that's when we first start talking about inflation, start to see the patterns. And what happened is there were giant companies that said, ooh, this is a real opportunity. We not only will pass along increased costs, we will jerk our prices up way beyond that, and we will make more money. And understand, I'm not sitting out here doing conspiracy theory. These CEOs actually went on their quarterly earnings calls to their investors and basically said the same thing. They said, Some of them said inflation has been very, very good to us because it gave us a chance to raise our prices well beyond inflation. So we put together a bill that said, no, you don't get a chance to do that. When you have moved in and raised your prices extraordinarily because you've got some kind of market power, you're the only one in this area, you have dominance in this area, or because there's been an emergency, wildfires, hurricanes, pandemics, then the tools are there for the federal government or your local state government to move in and say to these companies, you can't do that, and you're going to have to give this money back. You cannot do this with families. And the importance of that, I just can't emphasize this enough, is the federal government chooses sides. Is it going to be on the side of the giant corporations that are boosting their profits by 718%? Or is it going to be on the side of the consumer and says, no, there are going to be some rules in place so that your prices come down?
Senator, help me understand a little bit better. How do you do that? What specific rule are you going to tell a company to give that money back? And how do you determine what portion of that profit is, in fact, gouged out of the consumer? And as an addendum, why don't we do the same thing with academia, with university price increases in inflationary times? I don't see the same level of targeting, if you will. So, because you see this throughout our economy. So how do you pick and choose which one you're going to go after?
Well, so let's start with how you decide who you're going after. The real issue here is gouging comes from the ability to exploit. And it's either exploit market dominance. You are the giant in the field. You control 80% of the market. It's no surprise that it wasn't some little tiny egg producer that increased its profits by 718%. No, it was Cal-Maine, the biggest egg producer in the entire country, the one that doesn't face the kind of ordinary competition that you like to think about in markets. People have choices. People would not choose the more expensive eggs if lots of other eggs were available. So that's part of it. Part of it can be that the reason prices are up is because you're in a hurricane, because you're in a wildfire, because you're in the middle of a pandemic where we see enormous constraints. So you have immediate power in your region that you are serving. And all we're doing is we're giving the ordinary tools that the states, like I said, nearly 40 states already do this. We want to give that same tool to the federal government so the FTC can do it. And in the same way that the FTC looks at the basic data, the numbers, and says, wow, you have market dominance, we're going to look at your trade practices here. We're going to look at your purchasing practices under the Robinson-Patman. Are you charging more to little companies than you charge big companies? We go after unfair practices there. The same kind of thing is possible on price gouging. It's been done for decades now. Now it is time to use that tool nationwide against nationwide companies.